Hi, friends. So today I just wanted to address some of the misconceptions that I've been seeing in some of the assignments you've been turning in. Um, so one of the misconceptions that I see all the time and that students have expressed in different ways is that individuals, like an individual organism, like a single peppered moth or a single spider, um, a lot of times students think like, oh, they're going to adapt. Well, they can't change themselves. It's not a choice. And so I think one of the problems is that oftentimes we use this word adapt, like, okay, the peppered moth adapts to its environment. And we use it like a verb. And when we use it like a verb, it makes it sound like it's a choice, like you choose to be taller. Well, I can't choose to be taller. I can't choose to have different colored eyes. I can change my contacts. That would be an acquired trait, but I can't change my genes. And so we need to kind of switch the way that we word things. A species can have they can inherit an adaptation, but they're not going to adapt to their environment. It's not a verb. And so I apologize if maybe you guys heard that from me in any way. But let's take another look at the peppered moth. Okay, let's use that as an example. So here we have male and female peppered moths, okay? They're going to live long enough to reproduce, and they're going to have a variety of offspring. And we can see that because the male and the female peppered moths are both mostly white, most of their offspring is also going to be white. Oh, but look, there was a mutation that happened, and so they created one black moth. And this can happen fairly often, but this was a random mutation. This moth didn't choose to be black, or these other moths didn't choose to be the lighter variety. And if they live in a lighter forest, this moth is going to have a disadvantage. And so this moth is probably going to get eaten before it can reproduce. And so this moth is not going to be able to pass on the mutation to his children. But as the course of history has shown us, the pollution during the Industrial Revolution in Britain actually stripped the trees of that white lichen, and so the forest began to turn dark. And so what tended to happen was because this mutation of the black moth was now favorable, these black moths were living longer. They were mating with maybe a light moth, maybe they found another dark moth to mate with, but this dark moth mutation was passed down to the generations. And so over time, more and more black moths became part of the population because the white moths were getting eaten before they could reproduce. So the moths didn't choose to become black. They didn't choose to blend into their environment. It was that the moths that had this mutation were able to find other moths that also had that mutation. And so then more and more black moths appeared in the generations. So as the trees began to darken because of the Industrial Revolution, the black moths were able to mate and make more black moths. That random mutation was able to be passed down from generation to generation. Now, one common thing I saw on a lot of your assignments for the peppered moth was the fact that these moths only live for about a year. Does this make it easier or harder for scientists to study? And because scientists are trying to study the change in a population over time, it's actually made it a lot easier for scientists to study because they only had to wait a year before they saw these changes happen, before they were able to see the next generation and change and things like that. So it actually made it a lot easier for scientists to study because they were trying to look at the big picture. So today, this is why the peppered moth makes for such an interesting case study into evolution, is because now that we've decreased the amount of pollution, these forests that were once dark, the lichen has been able to grow back. And so the variety of peppered moth that is living longer is actually the white peppered moth. And so they're able to mate and have more white peppered moths. And so we've actually seen like a reversal in the phenotypes of these moths. And that's why it makes for such an interesting case study. So here's some key points about natural selection that I really wanted to hone in on. Number one is it depends on the environment. So the fittest is not always the strongest, the biggest, the fastest, whatever. Sometimes the fittest is the one that blends into the environment. And another thing that I don't think we've really honed in on, Because if the environment doesn't change, then neither does the species. If the Industrial Revolution had never happened and the forest had stayed white, those peppered moths would not have needed to change. Like they probably would have stayed white because the black ones would have gotten eaten and that mutation would have died out along with the black moths. So it's really only when the environment changes that certain varieties or certain mutations get passed on to the next generation. The other key point is that it's going to act on existing variation. So if there's no variation within a population, then they're going to go extinct. So if that mutation of peppered moth or rock pocket mice, if that black variety had not come about due to sexual reproduction, then they might have gone extinct. Another thing is that variation comes from random mutations. So if you think back to when we studied meiosis, there was a lot of variation. Remember the independent assortment and the crossing over that provided a lot of that genetic variation. And this is one of the reasons why. So if you think about connecting the genetics to the evolution, we have to have a variety of organisms so that we can survive changes to the environment. The mutations are a very natural part. Every generation is going to see new mutations. So you have genes that exist within you that neither one of your parents gave you because random mutations happen every single time an organism reproduces. And again, the mutations themselves are random, but natural selection or like that change in the environment is going to force one of those mutations to be passed on to the next generation. So evolution is seen across multiple generations when these varieties survive long enough to reproduce so that their genes are passed on to the next generation. It does not happen amongst individual organisms. And I think that's where the misconception was coming in. So make sure that if you're going to go back and redo assignments or from here on out, just make sure that we're not using that word adapt as a verb, but that species can acquire an adaptation. So I hope that this video cleared up some of those misconceptions that we've been having. If you have any questions, make sure that you email me or text me on Remind. Okay, bye-bye.